Good evening and welcome to the Sound Off program. My name is Linda Kirker. I appreciate the fact that you've tuned in to join us tonight. And we've had some beautiful weather in the last several days. A little rain today, but that helps the flowers grow, right? I want to open with just reading a portion of a recent, actually April 2nd of this year, Emerson Lynn wrote an editorial, and I just think it's pretty darn nice. I don't always agree with him, but sometimes I do. And it's called, "Okay, We're Old. How do we make that a good thing?" Well, we know we have many senior citizens in the state of Vermont. We're the second oldest state after Maine. So I think that's a good thing, and I hope you do too. Here's what he had to say. As has been stated repeatedly and laboriously, Vermont is the land of the aged, which makes us an outlier of sorts, given that we live in a culture that is completely youth-centric. We are the second oldest state and soon to become number one. Yay! But other than the fact that we will have fewer workers to support the aged in their golden years, and that it's expensive to live here, perhaps our swelling throng of shufflers is a good thing, a market that could be tapped for growth, as contradictory as that might sound. The research is beginning to show that it's the elderly who are the happy ones. Despite the lack of respect they receive from the young, they don't look at what could be, they look at what is. And they don't sweat the small stuff. They don't stress, well, not too much. Instead of defining happiness as being able to download an app, they are able to draw from their life experiences, their diverse cultures, and what's before them. They aren't bothered by the little things that in the end don't amount to much. They tune out the noise and focus on the melody. I love that. True, they can't do the things they used to do, but it's not necessary for them to run a 6-minute mile if they can allow the same pleasure to be taken from being able to walk around the block or along a beach. And the undivided attention from a grandchild means more than any adulation from past achievements. Amen to that. There is a richness that is because of aging, a richness that cannot exist in youth. It's being explained as a way to reinvent oneself, to create new passions, because there is the repository to be able to do so. We're learning about this because the ranks of the elderly are expanding in Vermont. Expanding. In Vermont, there were more deaths than births last year. We're an old state or a state of oldsters. Take your pick. We have a huge market made up of old people, and they want to know more about themselves and each other, and we should want to know from them. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because I'm one of those oldsters, along with many of my friends, and we meet once a week on Friday at 11 o'clock for coffee. And we have the best darn time. We laugh and we talk politics and we tell jokes and we write poetry and we just do all kinds of fun things. And that camaraderie, that social opportunity, which is so important, socialization is so important for all of us, especially when you're older and perhaps live alone. So I just wanted to chat about that for a minute. Now I'm going to get on to my guest, who is known to many of you. He is Representative Corey Parent. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Linda. Good to be back.
Yeah.
I'm excited. It's my first time in the Northwest Access Television's new facility, and it's beautiful.
Isn't it great?
I have to say, I did a quick walk around and seeing the facility, from a closet at BFA to this. It's fantastic. It's good to see public access television, getting a facility like this.
Absolutely.
Just because it allows so many people across Franklin County, and other channels across state of Vermont to engage with each other and talk about
Absolutely.
the ideas and the issues facing their communities, and how folks can address them to make the communities a little bit better of a place.
Exactly. It's a wonderful resource for our communities, and I'm really very proud and humbled to be a part of it. It was worth waiting 12 years, because that's how long I've been doing the show, for this facility to happen and for me to have the opportunity to enjoy it.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, we were just joking beforehand when growing up in St. Albans, I used to volunteer for this show and do some of the camera work out back, and now it's all done electronically. They don't need someone to do it, and a man on the street segment. But Channel 15 and Channel 16 have always been a huge part of our community, and just
Absolutely.
congratulate them for such a beautiful facility that allows us to sit here and talk about the issues of the day
Yes.
in such a comfortable and nice setting, and for the viewers to have a nicer product to watch at home.
Yes, a lot of work went into this, a lot of expense. David McWilliams and the board deserve a great deal of respect and thanks for making this happen. And there's a great staff here, the crew that works here. I just told them to keep me out of the electronics room, because I could ruin that in a hurry.
Yeah, especially with coffee or water. And
Yeah.
right?
So, Corey, it's good to have you back on the show.
thank you.
I hope we'll do this again.
Absolutely.
You just wrapped up the legislative session. Why don't you share a bit?
Yeah, sure. We finished up a little after midnight on the morning of Mother's Day.
I remember it
Yeah.
well.
So I didn't get home till after 1:30 on Mother's Day, so it was a weekend. But it's the session wrapped up predictably for anybody who's following. From the beginning of his governorship, Governor Scott made it clear he was not going to raise taxes on Vermonters. That include property taxes, income tax, fees. The Democratic majority decided this year to pass a budget in the tax bill with a little over $33 million in new taxes. Property taxes, it's about 2.5 cents on the residential side and 4 cents on the non-residential side.
Hold on, say that again.
It was about 2.5 cent increase per $100 of appraised value on a residential, and about 4 cents, I believe, on non-residential.
Okay.
What's really disappointing about that, from my point of view, is the state of Vermont this year, through economic growth, a little bit of money from tobacco settlement money, saw an increase in revenue of $150 million. That means we could have increased spending across state government by $150 million this year and not raised a dime in taxes or fees.
Yep.
We chose, or the legislature chose, to add another $33.5 million to that total. And when we talk about the affordability crisis here in Vermont, and the 4 years I've been state representative and the thousands of doors I've knocked on, property taxes has been issue number one. General affordability, people have been really concerned.
Really?
As I'm now taking on a new endeavor and traveling across Franklin County and Alberg, we're still having those same conversations. I was in Fletcher a few weeks ago, and if we had done nothing, the proposal that did come out shaved a little bit, but a home in Fletcher that cost $250,000, if we didn't do anything, their property taxes were going to go up $450 this year alone. If state government didn't address some of the issues. So, I'm disappointed, in that outcome. But the governor did send a letter out to us today and to legislative leadership that he's calling us back next week.
Great.
For a special session with, I believe, the plans to veto the budget and the tax bill, so that we don't pass that tax burden on to working Vermonters.
Absolutely. I mean, the burden is stiff. The burden is tough. Yeah. And I cannot, for the life of me, my approach would be different. Excuse me. $150 million increase in funds to the state, okay? Yeah. Why wouldn't they put that aside or put it into something that's in arrears to relieve some of the indebtedness?
We could do a lot of things with it. We could have helped fund. The budget did fund, so I'm going to be fair to everyone, did fund some of our pension obligations. But, there were things we could have done, including eliminating the Social Security tax, eliminating tax on military pensions. So for, like your article, for our senior Vermonters and retired Vermonters to not continue to pass high tax burden on them. They did the legislature did try to pass, or they did pass a bill that reduced Social Security taxes, but what they did in the meantime is move part of the education tax onto the income tax, and I think that's a dangerous piece too, because
I agree.
it had been able to actually. I was the only representative, down maybe one or two of us, but I know I was the only Republican representative who didn't vote for a income tax increase. Some people were playing the game.
It's never enough.
And so, my point of view is, if we put it on the income, some people was like, oh, put on the income tax too. Well, it would have brought down property taxes temporarily, but we would have climbed those back up over the next years, and we would have had the income tax set. And I think it would have put, Act 60 and Act 68, things that you're familiar with from the late 90s and early 2000s, I would think it would have put those on steroids. I think spending would have really gone out of control, and, we wouldn't be able to get our hands around it. And the issue I see with it too is, I've seen passed around some circles, some IRS data that shows that that people who are leaving Vermont since the year 2012 have taken with them about $300 million in income, which when people goes, well, they've gone to places like New Hampshire, Florida with no income taxes. That's cost the state of Vermont $30 million or so in revenue. So when people say, oh, there's this group of people that can pay a higher income tax, well, these people look at their alternatives and they're going to go, why would I give the state of Vermont X amount of dollars more when I can go New Hampshire and live a very similar quality of life, or go to Florida, enjoy warm weather, and not pay that tax. And then it puts more burden on those of us left here. Why it's so critical to grow our population and grow our workforce, so that we know we have roads to pay for, we know we have schools that we need to pay for, but I think if we grow our economy, we can grow those tax revenues without increasing tax rates and making it harder for people to afford to live here.
Well, we have a very low birth rate in this state.
I know.
and we have as we said, a high senior population. And unfortunately, many of those people, the ones who can afford to and are probably paying the higher taxes, are talking about leaving. So why aren't people who are raising these taxes thinking about keeping the taxpayers here?
I don't get it, because we've heard through my time in the legislature, we've heard, let's raise taxes on the top 20% of income earners in Vermont, the top 10% of income earners in Vermont. And so the curious person I am, I called the Joint Fiscal Office and I go, well, what is a top 20% income earner? What is a top 10%?
How many?
Not so much the number, but to be a top 20% income earner in the state of Vermont, this was as of 3 years ago. I haven't updated these numbers, but a family of four making about $80,000 a year. So that's a mom and dad working, making about $40,000 a year each. That's your top, obviously better off than the majority of Vermonters, but still wouldn't be what I would consider wealthy.
No.
The top 10% is a family of four making roughly $110,000 a year, a little bit more than that. So that's two public school teachers or a police officer and a nurse, very middle class jobs. And those are the folks that when people go, oh, we're going to raise on the top 10%, the wealth. And I go, Vermont really doesn't have, that core of wealthy people that, we can dip into in tax, because they leave for tax reasons to other states, or they may be event wealthy. Most people who make a significant amount of money in Vermont do it in 1 year and then it comes right back down because they sold a business. They sold
or property.
They sold something.
I sold a lot. My income went up temporarily for 1 year, and I had to pay a huge tax to the federal government.
Yep, but that happens. Whether it's inheritance or so on. You sell a home and income goes up, boom, and so those are issues when we talk about where do we gather revenue in Vermont, and I've always believed that we could slow the rate of growth in government and allow taxpayers to catch up with the state government they're paying for.
How about fiscal responsibility? Is there ever any discussion in Montpelier about auditing the Agency of Human Services and the Department of Education?
I haven't been involved either of those discussions. I've never served on a committee that looked at either one of those policy.
Somebody needs to do something.
And the state auditor is an independently elected person, so from the Progressive Party.
Not appointed?
No, Doug Hoffer is elected. So remember, Randy Brock years ago was elected auditor, and then Tom Salmon. And now it's Doug Hoffer, and Doug's a progressive, so Doug tends to do things like ski resorts should be paying more taxes or so on and so forth. So those tend to be the audits that come out of Montpelier. instead of looking across the spectrum, I think you could be nonpartisan in that role and really try to dig into issues. Do we do education effectively? Do we?
No.
Is AHS run effectively? And look at it from an auditor's perspective. I think that would make a lot of sense, but unfortunately, the legislature can't really, hasn't decided to point the auditor in that direction.
It's so easy, as they say, to spend other people's money. But is there ever any discussion about running the government like you would run your own household finances?
There's definitely discussion down there about that, but there's about only 53 people who talk that way in the House versus the 97 that don't.
Well, there's a clue, folks. If you want lower taxes and less government intrusion into your life, you got to elect more Republicans. I'm going to say it.
That's an argument.
Conservatives, whatever.
But, there were a few good bills, too. I don't want to be all doom and gloom of what's come out of Montpelier. I think there were some bills that came out that will really help Vermont businesses and employers grow in Vermont, which I think is important. One of them was one that I championed through the House Energy and Technology Committee, H739, and basically what that has allowed, and I was able to work a compromise that got support of unanimous approval through the House, all but one senator vote for it, so a pretty nonpartisan bill,
I guess.
But basically what we did is allowed 15 companies who are still some large companies in Vermont to not pay Inefficiency Vermont charges and allow them to use a 3-year running average of that money. So if we think here in Franklin County, a company like West Rock and Sheldon spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just on their efficiency charge. Oh, got a call.
We have a caller. Welcome to the show, caller. What's on your mind?
Well, I had to call in because Linda Kirker said she needed more Republicans down there.
Or either more Republicans or more conservative Democrats.
Well, we need people with common sense because, the people are moving out of the state by the loads. I told my wife in 2 years I want to be out of the state because you can't afford to stay here because when you're retired,
you
can't
alone.
afford any more of these major increases.
Yep.
They should, some of the departments down there in Montpelier, through nutrition, people that retire, not fill them. Instead of making the employment agency down there, where it's one of the biggest employers in the state of Vermont, having all those employees, let's downsize a little bit. Let's save a little money, because, people are leaving, and it's sad because, people have lived here all their years, and
we need your voice to be a little bit louder. I don't think the people on the listening to the program or viewing the program can hear you, and we can't either.
You can't hear my voice, Linda Kirker?
I can hear it. It's a little faint, but I can hear it.
Well, maybe Zach will turn it off. That way it'll
Whoa!
We can hear you well now, David.
What I'm saying is people by the droves are leaving Vermont because of the high cost of taxes in this state. In reference to, the trying to do something about the retirees that are on Social Security by not taxing them, and that would be one of the good things. But it ain't never going to happen. Not in this state, it's a tax spend, and we need to control the spending. Either that or the ones that really want to waste a lot of money. It's time to vote them out of office, Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, I would agree with you, David, on that one. And since you've been listening, I just want to thank you over the phone for the work you did on this beautiful facility we're in. But I agree. I mean, only 14 of us voted against this budget, which, people say, it grew less than economic growth, but it still called for an additional $30-some-odd million in new taxes when more money was already coming into state government. So
there's never enough.
I was one of the 14, to be against it, and obviously Bill H911, which raises property taxes, was not something I was in favor of, just because, like you said, it's if the prices of homes in Vermont aren't bad enough at times, it's the property taxes that may put it over the edge. People are paying a lot of money for their homes here in Vermont, and as a resident of St. Albans town, we actually have one of the better tax rates around. But if you look in, whether it's the city of St. Albans and other places, the tax rate's much higher. And those are we have to do our best to make sure those homes stay affordable for Vermonters.
Well, does the topic ever come up in the legislature these days about the, around $19,000 per pupil we're spending, which is, the national average is 11,700.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we doing wrong?
Special ed is what booting it up.
What was that?
Special ed.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of issues. I think that's what, I generally like about the governor's plan is the plan he rolled out is similar to what David brought up is, look, we can fill this gap with some of this money, extra money that we have this year. And then over the next 5 years, we can continue to not only pay back that money, but also save about anywhere, I believe, 200 to 300 million. I don't remember the exact number, just through attrition. As we look through schools, right now the student-staff ratio in Vermont is about 4.5 students. If we went to just 5.5 students per adult in the room, subtracting out, the governor subtracted out special ed, he subtracted out other folks, we would save hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that's a proposal worth at least considering it. And it hit a brick wall in the legislature. As soon as he suggested it, said no. I mean, people have beat up on this governor about bringing these proposals late in session, but I can tell you, we got there in January, he had 15 different ways to save X amount of dollars. He said, here's how I think we should do it. They rejected all of them. His first year, this is how I want to save money in education. They rejected all of them. Then at the end, they worked out a compromise. And so he's constantly come with new ideas, and yet they say, oh, where were these ideas? Well, they don't consider them. They just throw them out the window and beat them up. So, they get to the point, as well as the governor, as he continues to propose new ideas, or, this time of the 5 changes he wanted to make, 3 of them had already passed one body of the legislature, at least 3. So when they say, oh, these are bad ideas, he goes, you passed 3 of them already. Why can't, in some capacity or another, either the Senate or the House, why don't we get those back to, why don't we come together and agree on some of these and add 2 more things that I'd like to see, and we can walk out of here compromised together. But unfortunately, I think legislative leadership is, look to, really rally their base on this stuff and not focus on good public policy.
Did that carbon tax die this year, or are they going to raise that again?
The what?
We need to turn you up again.
The carbon tax?
Yeah.
So that came up in my committee a couple of days earlier in the session. I was one of the leading voices against it. There were a few people on the committee who think it's a good idea where we need to go. The legislature's starting to do its homework. The sponsor was Sarah Copeland-Hansis, who almost was Speaker of the House. So it goes to show you that high up leaders in the legislature support a carbon tax idea. And we've already seen gas prices increase almost $1 over the last few weeks, and we can all feel that in our wallets now. If state government were to do that, it'd make it even. We'd be at $4 a gallon almost if this carbon tax was in place right now, and that would hurt all of our wallets.
They never have enough. Yeah. Instead of looking at what's driving people out of the state who are already funding the state, I'd like to see a classroom of 20 students minimum.
Yeah. Well, and to get back to the carbon tax, I can tell you why some companies have endorsed it, and I can tell you why. So a company like Ben & Jerry's, which employs many people in this community, and we appreciate all that, the way the Essex plan was written, which was the proposal that came to legislature, is it would save them $1 million a year because they've offloaded all their trucking to the St. Albans Co-op, which trucks their cream in. They've offloaded all of the parts of they have pushed those costs onto their suppliers, and then they don't. Ben & Jerry's doesn't do trucking. Ben & Jerry's they're not out on the farm producing the product that makes their ice cream yet. They want it, so they would put a higher tax on those like farmers and the St. Albans Co-op through the carbon tax, and you and me. They themselves would save $1 million, but they wouldn't be paying any more money to their suppliers to help cover those costs.
Wouldn't the truckers, because of their increased cost, charge Ben & Jerry's more for their service?
They would try, but Ben & Jerry's is the large buyer, so they have negotiating power to keep those prices down. So, Ben & Jerry's, Seventh Generation, a few other of these companies really pushed it. And, I argue, they'll say that they price carbon into their own products. Any business that chooses as a business to do that, fine, but I don't think we should be forcing putting a new tax on Vermonters on things like home heating oil, natural
Oh, that would
gas
be awful.
on their vehicles. To me, that would be really a negative thing to do.
But what I believe some people are trying to do is to make it so costly to use propane or gasoline. If they make it really costly, then they're going to push for more people to use solar panels or whatever.
Well, that's exactly it. They want to use electricity for heat and all those things. What people don't realize, though, is then the week between Christmas and I think the first week of January, ISO New England burnt more heating fuel for electricity because it was so cold and they didn't have some of their other electrical usages and they had such high demand. More fuel in 2 weeks than the whole state of Vermont does on an average winter.
Wow.
All the citizens of Vermont they burnt in 2 weeks. When people say, oh, electricity is always our cleaner option, when push comes to shove, when energy is needed, they sometimes have to turn on the dirty fuel, in the back burner. So while people think they maybe are using cleaner energy, they're not. And that's something you have to reckon with people. I mean, can we continue to go after cheap renewable energy? Sure, I think Hydro-Quebec is a great example.
By choice.
Yeah, but even as the state of Vermont, if Hydro-Quebec produces some of the cleanest, cheapest energy, and they have in the state of Vermont for 30 years, we should be working towards working with them. They have enough
water.
They have
nuclear,
and they got 800 years of reserves of electricity built up in their facilities. My committee last year went up and met with Hydro-Quebec and some of their officials to talk about the relationship Vermont and Hydro-Quebec has, and it's critical to our economic success.
Absolutely.
And that, is cleaner energy.
Sure. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Also, in the stormwater runoff. You've heard a lot about this, Corey.
Yep.
And guess what? The city of St. Albans is implementing it, I think, in their first water and sewer bill in July. And it's coming to St. Albans Town, and it's coming to every county and city in the state of Vermont to pay for the cleanup of Lake Champlain.
Yep.
And it's based on any previous surface, your house, your driveway, your sheds, and everything. And you're going to be paying so much a tax each month or for the full year into this, EPA fund, which will help clean up Lake Champlain.
You know something, David? Millions of dollars in the past have been poured into cleaning up Lake Champlain. Now, I understand there's a problem. Pardon me?
Studies. There's been so many studies about the bay that it's ridiculous. No one's ever doing it. And I will give credit to the people up in Lake Carmi. They're finally getting action up there. Maybe they can use that as an experimental where they can come down to the bay halfway and trying to straighten that out, because we got such a beautiful lake. Until we take and clean up the sewer plants, we clean up the farmers, and then we test every house and camp in the town of St. Albans, the city of St. Albans, throughout the state. Until we do that, we're just throwing money away, because we need to find the source of the phosphorus.
Well,
I'll get off the phone because I held on too long. So.
Well, and I'd argue, I do think water quality is important. I think we all love Lake Champlain and Lake Carmi and the waters of Vermont. I think what we have to do is understand the balance. We passed a pretty aggressive bill 3 or 4 years ago, which became Act 64, water quality bill. And what people don't realize is, okay, we passed that bill in 2015. It was signed, I believe, in early June of 2015. And you have a year and a half of rulemaking process. So really, we haven't even seen a full year of that bill put into action. And so, I would say there's funding there. We're investing about $55 million a year as a state into water quality. I was talking to a farmer in Franklin County who's invested millions of dollars of their own dollars into water quality, improving their practices. So, it's one of these ones that I think it's going to take time, and we are making these investments into water quality.
Okay, what are they doing with the $55 million?
Yeah, various projects. They've helped municipalities fund wastewater cleanup. They've helped implement best practices on farms. They've hired a few extra inspectors to go out to farms and talk to them about how they can improve some of their best practices.
The liquid manure, I think, is a big problem.
It is, but I think, our farmers, it's a balance. We're the largest dairy county in New England.
And I love that.
And so what we need to do is work with our farmers, and as either we have the resources to help them make transition to either inject their manure or help them out. But I think just telling them cold blank now you have to stop doing X, Y, or Z is tough for them, because like any business, you can't just stop on a dime.
Well,
and they have to.
I understand.
And so. And I've talked to a lot of dairy farmers in Franklin County over the last few months, and they all care, and they're all doing the best
sure
they can.
Do. And we need them.
And like I said, one farmer I talked to has invested millions of dollars of their own money, of their own business's capital, into improving their practices. So, I think they're doing a lot of work. Heather Darby was down at the State House. She works for UVM Extension and does a lot of studies on this, and she was saying, in the Lake Carmi watershed, that the farmers have actually reduced the amount of phosphorus going into the ground and getting put on the fields to where they need to be. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of legacy stuff that we have to clean up, and so it's going to be one of those ones, unfortunately, that's going to take a lot of time and more resources. But
what I just don't want to see is the state putting regulations on your private well, things like that. Leave us alone. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to pollution of our beautiful lake, that's a tourist attraction. It's Vermonters love the lake, and we do need to do everything we can to make sure that it's
I agree. I think and for us, it's the call at Montpelier sometimes is for more money, but what money itself doesn't fix the problem. You have to have the projects to work on. You have to make sure the money being spent on these projects is worth,
the effort.
The effort at this point. And so,
Lake Erie.
Yep.
You're familiar with that?
Yeah, my college roommate and best man at my wedding was from Erie, Pennsylvania. So I spent some time, right down there, right on Lake Erie.
Well, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Erie, Pennsylvania.
No. I'm talking about Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, which is Erie, Pennsylvania is right on Lake Erie.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's between Buffalo and Cleveland. It's that little part that kicks out into Pennsylvania. So he's
they cleaned it up. Mm-hmm. What did they do?
Yeah, I mean,
has anybody asked?
No, we trust me. This has been a huge issue during my 4 years in Montpelier, and for us, it's they have a little bit different dynamics of just the water flow. We have where our biggest problems have been in areas that don't flow. The water doesn't flow overly well. We built infrastructure in some of these places. You look at St. Albans Bay, down in that corner. That's all swamp behind. The causeway there after the Bay Park, and that causeway wasn't always there. That was always supposed to be swampland, and so I think we have to work around the infrastructure that.
So what can we do to increase the flow? There must be.
In Lake Carmi, the town of Franklin and the legislature is working with.
Been a big.
We're looking to add aerators at the bottom of that lake, which basically puts oxygen in to the water, because we can't speed up the flow, but we can mimic some of that stuff. There are projects we can do to help cure the symptoms, but they don't necessarily cure the disease,
initial
the issue
problem.
And just think of we have.
You can't put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
We have decades and decades and decades of pollution at the bottom of those lakes. I think the city of St. Albans didn't have a wastewater treatment facility until the 1970s or late 1960s. It was a city for 70 years before that, and we had a sewer basically running straight into Lake Champlain.
Wow.
And think of camps on the lake, and
that's
both
just
lakes,
what I was going to ask
not having
you.
septic systems in or septic systems.
And they don't today either.
Some do, but I'm sure some are grandfathered that have just gotten by, and
that's not good.
Those are all areas of concern that those are all. It takes time to fix some of those problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know in Georgia there are a lot of camps, on the lake, and or homes, and I think they're year-round. No, they're not all of them, because they were complaining to the assessor and saying, well, now, we come here to spend the summer, and the water's polluted, and we can't really enjoy, our property. So
I mean,
What he did was, he gave them, I think, $1 million break on their taxes.
yeah, no, it's tough. I mean,
Not
the
all.
only and I voted against hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes in my 4 years in the
I
legislature.
bet.
But the only tax increase I've ever did end up supporting after Lynn Dickinson and I had an amendment that failed to pull the money out elsewhere was what became Act 64 to fund some of this water cleanup, and we extended the sunset on that on the property transfer tax, so people only pay it when they buy a property. But that funds a lot of the money. We're working. I know the governor's administration is still trying to work with TDI, which is a company that wants to build a electric, basically large
Facility?
a large electric wire. They want to put it under Lake Champlain so that they can feed Hydro-Quebec to southern New England and New York City. And if that were to come through, that would give the state of Vermont about $400 million to invest in water quality and
what would they be transporting?
just electricity. It's just a big electric wire basically under the lake.
Oh, it's a wire. Okay.
So it would. They originally picked New Hampshire to go over the mountains. New Hampshire rejected it. We're still in conversation. Say, hey, you could put it under a lake. None of us would see it. It wouldn't have any.
But are they going to have to dig and?
No, they kind of just lay it down on the floor, and so it would come in right out. I think it's in South Hero. It would enter into the lake and it would come out down in the southern part of the lake, and it would generate about, I believe it's $20 or $40 million a year for 10 or 20 years of revenue to the state of Vermont. Without raising taxes on Vermonters, it helped pay
guess
for a
what?
significant chunk of that.
There are people in Montpelier who would find a way to spend it and
on other things, but no, I think there it'd be a water quality thing. So I think we're all looking for ways that we can fund it. I think for us it's the last few years we've made significant investments in water quality and we continue to, and I just think it's one of those things we have to be a little patient on the results, unfortunately, because even if they say it's a $2.3 billion project to fix, if someone had magically had $2.3 billion, I don't think they could clean it all up tomorrow. It's just one of these things that just takes time.
Okay. Let's see. There is a new, I have so much here. I mentioned before to you, before the show started, 32 states have made English the official language of their state, which in my view, it should be anyway throughout the country, because this is the United States of America, and that's our basic language. So I'm wondering, do you think there's any chance? Oh, we need the volume up a little bit. We have someone on the phone again. Welcome to the show, caller.
Hello. I was wondering now, when the governor calls legislature back, do they get extra pay or overtime?
We don't get overtime. There is a pay like anybody going to work. There's extra pay. Not extra pay. It's not any more than we would receive in a regular legislative session. But there'll be extra dollars, but it's minuscule. You're talking, if we're there an extra week, $200,000 for all 180 legislators to be back versus $33 million in property tax increases. I think that's a good trade-off for any Vermonter.
If you can get rid of it.
And I don't think the governor's interested in bringing us back unless he's got something worked out with leadership. He's not interested in making us, all of us sitting down there
right
for weeks on end and costing Vermonters money on that piece.
Anything else, caller?
Yeah, well, it's just you don't hear that on any of the channels. Yep. You just say, I heard a couple of legislatures say, we'll go back to work so the citizens will get their money's worth. But the thing is, nothing was said that they're going to get extra money. I think they should say that. All right, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm one of the few legislators that works a real job outside of Montpelier full time. At this point, I'd rather be working my day job, getting caught up to being gone for 4 months. And I agree. I wish we didn't have to go back, but to me, it's something I'm willing to go back to do, not raise taxes on Vermonters. I think the governor has been very clear. So I think legislative leadership pushed the governor to this to this level to not fully get through his agenda or get through a budget that didn't raise taxes on Vermont. It's pretty clear. Don't raise taxes, and I'll probably support the budget.
Exactly.
And they chose to do the one thing he doesn't want to do.
Well, thankfully, you have that perspective.
Right.
And all of them down there should understand that the taxpayers are overburdened, and they need to start finding ways to cut costs.
Yep.
Regarding English as an official language in Vermont, which we don't have, do you know, and I don't know the answer to this, if the state of Vermont funds different types of paperwork in different languages, like some states do?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know either.
I do know we pay for some signs to be in French to help out with tourists. Like if you go to Montpelier, it says like bienvenue, to Montpelier.
Bienvenue.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that way, that I get because we're
Right.
we're St. Albans here where we sit right now. We're an hour away from 4 million
right.
people sitting in Montreal. But no, I don't know. If
I'm
we fund
talking
any payment.
about, like ballots and all kinds of other.
I've never seen one in another language, but
I haven't
I
either.
don't know that. I don't know that.
That's
off
a
the top of my
big
head.
cost in the federal government to, print things up in all different kinds of languages, and that's a big expense.
Yep.
So anyway, plus it would be nice to just know that English is the official language of Vermont. And it also forces people who come here to assimilate and, to learn our language. So, all right, let's see. Do you think Vermont could become a right-to-work state?
No, but that's the way our legislature is made up. It doesn't mean that I don't support the concept. I think for those out there, right to work basically means if you work a job as a nurse, say at Fletcher Allen, and you choose not to join the union, you can't be forced to join the union
And pay dues.
I definitely, I think we live in a country where you get to choose who you're associated with. We don't say, to be on the Sound Off show, you have to be a Republican and
Exactly.
pay dues, or you have to be a Democrat and pay dues. I don't think workers should have to be forced into anything that they don't want to do. When it comes to that, if they want to join a union, great for them. I understand their right to do that, but I don't think anyone should be forced into something as a condition of employment to join something that is
that
of
they
that
don't
nature.
want to be a part of.
Right. So,
but the state of Vermont did enact a law that forces people who work in a
and the argument there to force people to join a union, to give balance to both sides of the argument is that, if you're not in my union, but we're negotiating higher salaries for the rest of us, we're paying for that and you're not. But, I've talked to employees who've gone from Fletcher Allen to Northwest Medical Center where they're union versus non-union, and they've done better in a non-union environment because they've been rewarded for their ability.
Absolutely.
And how well they do their job. And so I think, those are things to consider. I think oftentimes, when you look at a union contract and people get upset about a union contract, your union negotiated that. Some people are able to negotiate better on their
I
own.
never wanted anybody to negotiate for me. Thank you very much. I work hard, and I'm productive. I do a great job, and I don't need anybody to do that for me. And if the person beside me has the same level of expertise or credentials, and one of us is really putting out and getting the job done, and the other isn't, well, then the employer should decide how much money, you're worth.
I get the need, for unions, and I understand why people want to join them, but I think, they should have the same open-minded concept when people don't want to join them. I think it's a choice that people should be allowed to make on their own.
Okay. Let me see here. We talked about gasoline.
So Dave called before. I still had the bill on
Yes.
Efficiency Vermont that I'd like to get into and talk about.
Sure.
I spent a lot of time this session on it. So currently, IBM is the only business in the state of Vermont, or Global Foundries, that has never paid into Efficiency Vermont. What they were in what's called the Self-Administered Electrical Efficiency Program. So it's called SMEEP. Bad acronym. State government always creates bad acronyms. But basically, what they do is instead of paying $1 million plus a year to Efficiency Vermont, they spend the $1 million on efficiency projects within their own plant, the full amount.
So
Now,
they're still caught in the trap.
So they still have to do it, but what we heard from a lot of Vermont businesses, they were paying hundreds of thousands, up to maybe $1 million a year into Efficiency Vermont, but only getting a fraction of that back, 50,000, 100,000 of the 600,000 or 700,000 they paid in. So what we've done is we created a pilot program that allows 15 companies across the state of Vermont to participate. They'll have to apply and be chosen by the administration. But basically what it allowed them to do is invest in projects on their own with all their own money that can help their business. And I was able to get definition in. So say you're a factory that makes teddy bears. If this machinery is 30 years old and it produces 10 teddy bears for every 1 unit of electricity, and you can put a new one in that creates 12 teddy bears for that same unit of electricity, that counts as an efficiency investment. So it allows some of these businesses, I think in a positive way, to invest in capital and not just on changing light bulbs, which is what they have to do with Efficiency Vermont. It also allows them to reduce their peak. So I think one of the neat projects that was brought to us, I don't know if this one would make the pilot, but like J-Peak produces enough heat off of their hockey rink. To cool a hockey rink, you're pulling heat out of the building. They produce enough heat that they could heat 2 of their hotel buildings with it. This heat's now just going into the air. J-Peak spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to Efficiency Vermont each year doesn't have the extra capital to invest into that project right now. If we were able to take that money that they're spending now, or if they're able to take that money they're spending in Efficiency Vermont and make that investment, they'd be better off.
Okay.
And so they would save money and be more energy efficient.
Why do they have to pay money into Efficiency Vermont to start with?
Probably about time you were in the legislature, maybe a little before you were in the legislature, the state of Vermont created Efficiency Vermont, which is an electrical utility, and it's about I think depending on what you are, 5 to 8 cents on your electric bill is a tax that goes to. It raises about $55 million a year, and basically they turn around and spend money on reducing. For a while it was light bulbs, putting in more efficient light bulbs. So that way homes could use less
We've already
electricity
been
and save
there,
money.
you
Yeah,
and
you and I
I.
have already been on that one. But I think, and I understand the investment in efficiency, and businesses understand too, what this bill did, because again, they were putting this money into programs that they couldn't control. Again, we're outnumbered down there, so we can't always get everything we want. This bill's far from everything I originally proposed, but we're able to get it, so it'll make their investment in Vermont better, allow them to compete with their sister companies in other states a little bit better. And I think we'll save thousands of jobs in the state of Vermont.
So
over the
they're
next years.
contributing what?
So Efficiency Vermont are the businesses.
Efficiency Vermont.
So in a lot of these places, not that much. I'm looking at a manufacturer in St. Johnsbury had paid in over the last 6 or 7 years $1 million to Efficiency Vermont. A couple $100,000 a year, and probably only got, Efficiency Vermont will help subsidize some projects and this, but they probably only got $200,000 of return on investment. So
I don't understand that. It doesn't sound right.
Well, it wasn't. That's what we're trying to fix, is so that if the state of Vermont says you need to spend $600,000 in efficiency, you should at least be able to spend the full $600,000 in your own facility.
Why does the state of Vermont tell people they have to?
That was a policy decision made 20 years ago.
That's government controlling business.
Yep. I think a lot of people would argue that we could wean away from that, but the majority of the legislature is not built to do that. We obviously, when in a legislative body, it's not just what you feel. You got to get some through 150 people, and then 30 people in the Senate, and then to a governor that would be supportive. So,
this is just a big. I'm a bit careful of what word I use, but I don't like government taking over healthcare, education. I think education is best when it's controlled by the towns, deciding what they want to teach. I don't think, we're not doing a great job educationally in this state.
And I think, to just finish up on the Efficiency Vermont piece, I understand where you're coming from, but I think we have to look at it as, this pilot program, can these businesses do a better job than Efficiency Vermont? And if so, we can make the argument to other people and say, look, companies already have the incentive to invest in efficiency.
Yeah, to save
they have
money.
Every incentive in the world to save money.
So let them do it.
So let's let them do it. Let's not pull the money out of them and make them
exactly
pay for others' projects.
I wouldn't want to be in business here if I had to deal with that.
But to go with education piece to the local community, I agree. I think what works in Vermont is that we have a lot of our local school districts. I think what the issue is we built a system, and I think this is what drew you into the legislature all the years ago when you were there.
Act 60 did too.
Was that people, when they vote on their school budgets, don't necessarily see what their tax rate's going to be. All the bills get sent to Montpelier, and then we have to figure out how to disperse it. So our schools up here have done a good job not spending a lot of money. But Burlington's up 12%, or Williston's up 10%,
and then we have to pay for that.
And then we all pay for that across the state.
You try to be frugal, and then you have to pay somebody else's.
So
bill.
I think what we really have to do is reconnect the voter to those decisions. I watched
absolutely.
Again, as I'm working my way around Franklin County, I was up in Fletcher a few weeks ago, and I watched them debate, and they saw what their tax rate would be, and they debated, and they reduced their spending. And some of these people accepted a tax increase, but not as high of a one as it could have been.
Yeah.
But they were making a decision going, okay, if I make this decision, this is what it costs me. Am I okay with that or not? And some people are, and some aren't. And they debated it as a town, and I think that's fantastic. And
I do too.
Communities should do that. I think we would allow us. But the problem is we have and I see it is when I'm out talking to people, like I said, property taxes is one of the issues I hear. Effectively, the legislature has to pay the bill what the local community sent to us. So the only long-term way to fix it is to reconnect the two. I mean, people will sit there and go, well, the towns voted to raise these taxes by passing their school budgets. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, Vermonters voted for Phil Scott overwhelmingly, and they voted for people like me because we said we weren't for supporting higher property taxes. So I think if you to put people on the ballot and said, this is the cost, this is what they want to spend, this is how much it'll cost you, this is what the increase in your property taxes are, would you still support it? I think you'd get different outcomes. Well, and I think we do a disservice to Vermonters in doing that because they're struggling to pay for property taxes. They want to have good schools, but we need to allow them to be able to make those decisions at a local level. I mean, I think a localized government is better off. If people
need to stand up and know what's going on, and when you're going around because you're running now for the Senate, which is a good thing, and but as candidates are going around to households to talk to people or go to select board meetings or whatever, the people, the individual voters, need to say to the candidate, where do you stand on raising property taxes, or where do you stand on this or that?
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think and like I said, allow people to make those decisions. I've talked to people, a couple years ago, the city of St. Albans wanted to put in a new sidewalk. And I know a lot of people who don't like their property taxes going up, but they're like, you know what? I'll have my property tax go up $10 or $15 for these new sidewalks because I'll see the value of it.
Right.
People, you need to allow them to see the full picture of what they're voting on. And I think they would make,
smart decisions.
They'd make the decision they make
for their community.
And it wouldn't be us in Montpelier arguing over this.
Exactly.
And I think, the Brigham decision that created this mess in the late 90s said every Vermonter is entitled to an equal education. And I agree with it, but I think we've perverted what an equal education means because we think it means dollars. But I can tell you right now, if a kid can go to one school and take a chemistry class but not take one at another school, or an economics class and not take one at another school, or have access to a tech center and not have access, we're not giving those kids the same opportunity, even if we're spending the same amount of money to educate them.
Exactly.
The education has to be about the product and not, so much what it costs. It needs to be if I choose, can I
Quality.
get the same education in St. Albans as I could get in Brattleboro or Burlington or Fletcher or
But so
Cambridge?
much depends on the teacher.
Yeah.
All the money in the world can't take the place of a quality teacher who loves to teach, knows their subject matter, and loves the kids and wants them to have this knowledge. There's nothing better than that in an education system.
No, and I'm blessed. I went to St. Albans City School and BFA St. Albans before going on to college, and I always had really good teachers, and we have great teachers in this
I
community.
did too in New Jersey when I was growing up. I want to bring up one more thing. As scintillating as this is, the marijuana bill, there was just an event in Burlington. 60 marijuana vendors in Burlington. Now, I don't know where they came from, how many are Vermonters, but here's the scenario I'm looking at. The governor has said that he doesn't want, in so many words, he doesn't want our state or local police working with ICE regarding illegals, okay? So they feel protected. Then you have, Vermont's one of the most generous welfare states, okay? So you're protected from ICE. You come to Vermont, and if you need welfare benefits, they're some of the most generous. And then you have all of these marijuana vendors. And so I see that as a magnet. People will come.
Yeah, I mean, I think the legislature passed a really poor legalization bill this year. I think whether you support legalizing marijuana or not, the way in which we did it, I don't think is super effective. Basically, people are allowed to grow 2 mature plants, and 4 immature plants, whatever that means. I don't quite understand what that means.
I don't either.
But you still can't buy the seeds legally. So,
it's an illegal drug at the federal level.
To get to that point, so you can use your piece. And then also, when you're talking revenue, and you and I may disagree on this one, but I'm sitting there going, if it's legal, you should, if you're going to legalize it, which I didn't agree with legalizing it in the first place, it should at least be something that we can tax and regulate, so that way the product on the market, right now you're still going to keep a black market of dealers because some people are going to choose not to grow their own. So you're going to have people selling and buying, and that's still illegal. And
then they have to pay the consequences.
But I just think the way in which we did it this year was very poor. I think if you're going to at least legalize it, you might as well tax it and regulate it, so that way you at least create tax revenue, so we can not tax Social Security and other things. I mean, again, I'm not a proponent of legalizing, but if you are, you might as well get the money.
We're down to the last minute and a half or so. Did the legislature this year cut the amount that they tax Social Security?
So they did. It was in a trade-off of the bill, but they increased property taxes to do it. And
so we're going to pay one way or the other.
And I don't think ultimately the governor's going to sign that bill. He's going to veto that bill because he wants to cut Social Security tax. I want to cut it, but we don't want to have a tax increase that.
Well,
goes
we
along
can
with
always
it.
go to Florida and you don't have a Social Security tax or a state income tax.
Yeah.
Those people are going. Okay, we're down to the last minute. Corey, your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you for having me. The hour always flies by.
Oh, I know.
I always get worried. Well, what are we going to talk about for a full hour? And then next thing I know, it's
over.
It's 8 o'clock and time to go home. So no, I've always enjoyed coming on the show. We've come on regularly, through various legislative sessions. And if I'm successful this fall, I'll definitely love to come back on as the state senator and talk about what's going on in Montpelier.
That would be great. Yeah, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
I know you're a hard worker if there ever was one. And so I hope that you do get this. We're out of time.
All right,
folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Corey, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Linda.
And I'll see you again next week. I have guests lined up for weeks ahead. So thanks a lot for tuning in. Good night.